We could kind of start informally, like it's 12. So thank you, Hélène, for taking part in our Poundmaker Indigenous Performance Festival. This is our 4th edition of our festival. We've gone from live focused on our local Indigenous history back in 2017, and to including an intercultural, then following year an intercultural performance, where we began the adaptation of Uncle Vanya by Anton Chekhov. The 3rd year, we began to include more artists, and we went more in depth into Uncle Vanya. And then we began to invite as well cultural speakers, Indigenous cultural speakers. So this edition, we expanded, it's almost like the culmination of a 3 to 4 year research project on my part into Indigenous performance, looking at Indigenous performance as an artistic discipline or a genre that has its own methods, techniques, and body of knowledge rooted in the Indigenous traditions of Turtle Island. And it is open to all people, and it is not limited or defined by identity. So that was my premise for the last 3-4 years. So this is the most, this festival, it's I'm laying it out. We are laying our vision out, myself and my collaborators. All of us, we are community-based. We live directly in our communities, speak our language here, take part in our ceremonies, and are very much in tune with our history and our culture. So in visiting our festival, one of the things that's important for us is that we create a platform for an open dialogue, that we're not focused on one agenda, that we're not focused on one vision, but we have a broad agenda of Indigenous performance. And it is based on that I was very intrigued in your film on Lepage production called Kanata. And because in my mind, it fit into the broad spectrum of Indigenous theater of Turtle Island, which is the production itself, which is, there was Indigenous involvement based on the film I watched. And plus there was Indigenous people from across the world involved in that production from France. And the director was non-Indigenous. So those factors, on the opposite end, we would have a production of, let's just say, Indigenous people, recognized Indigenous people in an Indigenous community, in Indigenous structures, and in their own language, which is more what I do. So the spectrum is broad. So Lepage production, for me, fits into our whole schema. So I was intrigued by the production, and then I watched your film. And I thought I was very touched by the participants, their heart in the film. So that's my introduction to you, Hélène. Thank you very much for taking part in our festival. And,
well, it's a pleasure for me to be part, and I'll be pleased to answer to your questions and tell you about the experience.
Yes, okay. In your film, I was, for the people who didn't watch the film yet, could you tell us the brief story of your movie?
Yes. In 2000, let me think, in 2016, I was told that Robert Lepage was preparing a show talking about First Nation topic with the Théâtre du Soleil in Paris, and that there wouldn't be any Indigenous people in the in the cast. So with my co-writer Sophie Mangado, whose brother is part of the troupe, we were very curious to follow the making of that creation, because the Théâtre du Soleil is a very renowned theater, and it's very original by its distribution, because they are more than, for this production in particular, there were 35 actors at the beginning from different countries, something like 16 countries. So for us, it was really intriguing to see how they would create with Robert Lepage and what it would be, because they would be part of workshop to write on what would become the show. Robert Lepage arrived with an idea, the idea of doing something that would talk about the arrival of French people in the in Canada, when they arrive in Canada. So about the colonization, the first encounter with Indigenous people. But he was also very interested into the stories of the pensionnat autochtone. How do you say? I forgot.
Indigenous people?
No,
residential school?
Yeah, residential schools, and the missing and murdered woman in West Canada. Now it's being well known that it exists elsewhere in Canada, but at first it's been a long time because of Robert Picton that we know it's happening in British Columbia. So it was the three things that he was interested into digging. But through this, he wanted also to include the stories of these actors with their own stories. For example, in the troupe, there is an Armenian actor whose grandparents were part of the genocide, Armenian genocide. There is one Iraqi actor, very famous Iraqi actor, who had to flee the war. And there is also 8 Afghani actors from different ethnic groups that are also part of the troupe. So Robert was really, but there is also a woman from Africa. There is a Iranian actress. So he wanted to add their input and their views on this reality of Indigenous people in Canada, but through their own experience of life and as actors.
Oh yes, I think well that that premise of course is it's a very broad premise, and it enables the actors to explore their own I guess the genocide in their own lives, and but from the beginning it was understood that there would be no Indigenous people of Canada in the cast, right? That's what you mentioned.
In the cast, but in the cast,
yes.
Specifically in the cast, yes.
Yes, and so that means it was in production for a few years with this understanding.
Yes, the film follows 2 years,
yes.
But there were one encounter and 1 week of rehearsal before we start shooting. Mm-hmm. So we started to shoot in 2016 in the fall, when they came to British Columbia, to Banff Center, and to Quebec City, because near Quebec City there is l'Ancienne Lorette, where there is also an Indigenous community, where Robert Lepage has his own house. So he's very close from this community. He did some shows with them in the past. And he had this project in mind for a long time. So it was important for him to show them this part also, Wendake, it's called, to show the actors Wendake, where he lives.
Yes.
And yeah.
When I watched the film, I was very much moved by how the Indigenous consultants from Banff and also from British Columbia, how they were sincerely moved and honored to be part of this project, your film, and this project. Could you tell me a bit about the Indigenous consultants who were involved?
Yeah, I would say there are two different kind of people involved. There are the people at the Banff Center. The contact was made by Ex Machina team to meet with the troupe of dancers, with different people at the Banff Center. For the part in Vancouver, two of the person that the troupe met were part of a documentary I did in 2009, because knowing that Robert Lepage was interested in talking about Robert Picton and the reality of missing and murdered Indigenous women. In this film I've done on human trafficking in 2009, I've met CJ. CJ is a survivor. She escaped from Robert Picton's farm. Her own sister died there at the farm. She's, for me, we have the same age, and she is, for me, the more resilient and more courageous person I know in my life. So we became friends. And there was also a policeman who was the one to leak the names of the indigenous women who were disappearing, because at the time the police of Vancouver didn't want to do an investigation. So he leaked the name to the global news media. And this is where it all started, where people start to be interested in knowing what was going on and caring about these women, because we know some of them were sex workers or having drug issues. So for me, those two persons were key. If you would do a piece of theater talking about this topic, to meet actors who went through who lived this story were the best to tell about it and to inspire the actors. So this is, for me, it was my little input in the creation to be able to just put them in contact. But after that, as a documentary filmmaker, I disappear behind my camera, and I cannot, you know, what can I say? I had this chance in my mind to follow one of the most important stage manager we have in theater manager we have in Quebec and in Canada, Robert Lepage, and this troupe who is also famous. So for me, the important thing was just to film this and try to, but also because I was really intrigued by, because of, maybe I'm a bit confused now. I'm not confused, but I may confuse people, but all the films I've done in the past are always talking about this mixity and this importance of sharing from different culture. And so for me, this show of Robert Lepage was really something I wanted to follow, to see how he would do that without, in my mind. And it was part of the resume of the film at the really beginning of the film, when we asked the foundings to do the film. I thought he would not fall into the trap, you know, he wouldn't fall into the, how do you say, les pièges. I thought he would be able to manage to do something without being criticized, sorry.
Yes.
Yes.
For me as a viewer of this film, of course, I was skeptical at first because of the controversy. But once I saw in your film the consent that was given by the Indigenous participants, the consent and the collaboration, then I no longer viewed it like that. And then I began to view it as an artistic production. And as a theater maker myself, I was very much I was interested in what were the actors of Theatre du Soleil, what was their initial impressions upon working on this production? They must have been surprised and shocked how Canada is.
They were very excited first because it was the first time that Ariane Mouchkine would give her actors, her troupe, to another stage manager, because normally she directs all of her shows. Sometimes she has some assistant that are used to be other actors of the theater that take part in it with her, but it was the first time Ariane Mouchkine was not part of the creation at first. After the controversy, she came in to try to save and to do something of the show. But at first, for the 2 years where I was filming, Ariane Mouchkine was around, but she was never in the theater. Also because for her, as a stage director herself, would have been too difficult not to intervene. So the actors had to learn to work with Robert Lepage. And even though, when sometimes you look, the theater of Robert Lepage and the theater of Ariane Mouchkine, in the result may seem similar in some ways, because they use very original techniques. Let's say Robert Lepage is more, let's say, technological. Ariane Mouchkine is more, she's more into the handcraft, but very high-end handcraft. But it's both work with improvisation, but very differently. So, for example, with Ariane, they work and they have to dress themselves. They had to find costumes, some elements of decor, which with Robert, it's very fast improvisation. So no wigs, no costumes. They have to play a character in improvisation without any costumes, without any preparation of self-being or... So it was really different for the actors to work in this way. And for some of them, it was quite, how do you say, destabilizing. But so this was, in my mind, one of the things I wanted to show in the documentary. It was one of the thing I was following and that I wanted to put in my film. When the how do you say, polemic started in the summer of 2018, I knew that I would have to leave some of the things I wanted to show in the documentary to concentrate on what was this creation before it all stopped. It was stopped, completely stopped. You know, one day it says, okay, there's no Indigenous people, this is not okay, and the show was canceled. Robert Lepage ex machina said, okay, the show is canceled. And then something changed. And I decided not to pursue the shooting of the documentary because I already had so much stuff I had filmed, and I thought my documentary would be the chance to show what was the real intention, what was the démarche, the respect into this production that was all along the creation. There was a respect, and this is that film. The film is the result of something that never took place, because there was a show in the December 2018. There was a show presented in Paris, but this was a 1.5 hour show, only focused on the third part. This was supposed to be a 6-hour show with 3 parts. So very little left of it was left, little piece of it was left. And it was the piece with Robert Picton. And I think maybe, and it's what I think, this part was kept because this part was based on true testimony from CJ and from that policeman and from people, from what they witnessed in the Downtown Eastside and what they could read. The other 2 parts were more into the history part. So maybe more difficult to play after all the critiques that were written everywhere, or were, I'm searching for my words, sorry.
I understand, yeah. I was just curious, you mentioned once the polemic started in July 2018, you had to leave some parts of your film out.
Yeah.
What kind of things did you leave out?
For example, all some of the work of improvisation of the actors. Some actors were really destabilized, and all their characters were changing over every rehearsals, because rehearsals were, it was 1 or 2 weeks rehearsals every 6 months. So in the time, the characters were changing a lot. Some of them were disappearing, becoming something else. Before, the character would be a woman, then it would become a man, or it would even become a transgender character. So this was really interesting. And for me, it was like more on the theatrical focus of the creation. Unfortunately, what came out of the, not unfortunately, because I absolutely think my film is essential to understand what really was the intention and what would be this show that never happened. But I would have liked to work on this part of the film, to show this part of the film, more than the polemic that I didn't have the choice to. For me as a filmmaker, I really felt it was my duty to show what really happened, because it was said that there were no Indigenous people at all during all this creation, that no Indigenous people were consulted. And for me it was really hurtful. So imagine the actors, imagine Robert Lepage, imagine all those people who work for 2.5 years, even 3 years on this show. Because in between rehearsals, they would read, they would make research, they were passionate for this subject, very curious. And some of them were in contact with CJ. They would ask her to know about more things, or they were really in a demarche of creation. And it was suddenly stopped by people saying that they never consulted or never even care about what Indigenous people thought of what they were doing. And it's very difficult also to receive this, because the show was not, they were not, yes, of course, there were some Indigenous character, but there were a lot of other characters. It was talking about the traffic of opium in Vancouver with the Chinese. It was talking about so many different things, not only Indigenous topic, you know.
Yes,
You know.
you mentioned your hurt and the actor's hurt and so on. What about the feelings and the hurt of the Indigenous consultants like CJ? What was their feelings about this controversy?
Oh, well, CJ, it's difficult for me to talk about this, because I think CJ, you know, she cannot put hold on her shoulder all this pressure. But for her, it was really unfair, because as she says in the film, and I'm not doing a fiction, so I didn't invent this sentence, but she says in the film, she clearly says, after talking to the actors for 2 hours and more about her life, she says to the actor, bring my voice to all the countries from where you come from. She says that. So she really knew in what she was taking part of. She knew. And she was happy because CJ, you know, after she did my film in 2009, of course, a lot of people wanted to have her because she's a survivor of Picton, but she also have a post-traumatic syndrome, and she has to be careful. And during the film, as I was doing the film and the actors were preparing the show, CJ was one of the key witnesses in the Commission on Missing and Murdered Women, and it was her principal cause. She didn't care anymore about the piece of theater. For her, the piece of theater was a way to express herself. There would be many ways, and the commission was her, as an Indigenous woman, her way to express herself and try to get some justice for Indigenous women. So she knew in what she took part, and she truly got involved into that. She really wanted to be heard through this piece of theater, not as CJ, but as an Indigenous woman, victim of all this violence. But she was also fighting in a very more important way, fundamental way, which is through the justice of Canada, you know. So she was shocked, and some Indigenous people against the project tried to reach her, and she never wanted to talk to them because she said that even, and this I know she would say, she is Indigenous, she really cares for her sisters, for her it's her cause, but she's also a human being, and she has her own opinion, and she doesn't think it's good to talk in only by one voice and have all the same opinion on a topic.
Yes. One thing I wanted to ask is, within all this intercultural exchange with Indigenous people in this country, with Lepage, yourself, the actors, the people in Banff, people in Vancouver, was there ever an exchange of tobacco?
Of what? Tobacco? Yes.
Tobacco.
Every time I was going to France, I was bringing tobacco from CJ. CJ would ask me to go buy tobacco on her hand to give to the actors, and we would do a ceremony. Okay. Every time I go.
Okay. Because yes, in our worldview here as Cree people in Saskatchewan, they say you can't break that, you can't break something that's done with tobacco. No matter who it is with or whatever the deal is, whatever the situation is, when you offer tobacco, you can't break that. More so the participants, they can't break that tobacco. They say, because that's sort of like a sacred bond, and nobody else can come out and break that bond. No matter what their beliefs are, no matter what that situation is, they can't come in. It's very much like any production we undertake or any project that I undertake here in Saskatchewan or in Canada takes place with tobacco. Sometimes it's me. Sometimes it's me and a group of people or somebody. But even if it's just me, I always say nobody can say anything about that because I did it with tobacco. You're not bigger than tobacco. That's what I tell them, that the only one bigger than tobacco is a great spirit. So that's our belief. So I wanted to ask that, and so I'm happy to hear that your dialogue took place with tobacco, because in our Indigenous beliefs, that always leads to a good result. So I felt your film led to a good result because it opened our eyes to intercultural collaboration in this country. And it's possible shortfalls, it's possible obstacles. And I wanted to ask about the actors of Ariana Manushkin. Some of them, what nationalities were they? Were they intercultural as well?
The actors, yes. There is an actress from Togo, an actress from Iran, 8 actors from Afghanistan, 1 Iraqi, 1 Armenian, of course, some French actors. There was an Italian actor. There was an Australian actress. And this Australian actress was really interesting because from the first day, she said, as an Australian, I know how touchy it is to tell the story of Indigenous people, because we know also in Australia, and I think even more than in Canada, you don't talk about Indigenous topic if you are not from the community. So she was really careful about this from the beginning. So she's one of the actors who knew something would happen.
Yes, I understand that there's that discourse here in Canada, and in my thinking, I think yes, it's valid in some contexts like law or politics, maybe even literature. I don't know.
Alex, oh, there is Alex Rogalski.
Okay, but in theater, not all disciplines have the same laws, is what I would say. Because theater is an intercultural, collaborative art. It's a group of people. Very different from other arts like film or visual art. And so sometimes I think some of that, a lot of that appropriation discourse maybe not, it's not entirely applicable to theater. What do you think about that?
As a white woman, it's now very difficult to say something about this.
Okay, yes, no, that's, but, and so I shared that with you, and
yes.
And
what
I understand like your hesitancy. I don't want to get you into trouble because of the time.
No, but what I can say is, as a documentary filmmaker, I've been working on this film of murdered and missing Indigenous women in 2009. I've been also co-script writer on another documentary on missing an Indigenous woman in 2017 with my co-writer was Indigenous. I did films on Africans in how do you say, illegal immigrants, illegal African immigrants in Italy. And I'm a white French Canadian woman, but I was touched to see this Black Muslim man lost in a city like Florence. For me, I'm part of a world. I'm not part of a white French Quebec community. Otherwise, my life would be so boring. So for me, theater is as a documentary filmmaker, I'm allowed to film this. And as long as I give those people the voice they had, their own voice, I listen to them. I don't use them to say what I would say or my point of view. I truly listen to them, and my film is what they say. And in theater, it comes from the actors, and you can be what you want in theater. You can incarnate whatever. You can incarnate an animal, or you can incarnate a man, a woman, or... And in this piece of theater, it was like the epitome of, I don't know how to say in English, but everyone would play something else. And it was a very complex story, very complex story. And it was not even, the process and the story was not even finished to be told. It was undergoing for 2 years, but there were still 6 months to go before the premiere of this piece of theater.
On the basis, like if I was to examine this situation, which I have, if I examine it like a contract lawyer, I would say it was understood from the beginning there would be no Indigenous people in the cast. That was a given. Tobacco was exchanged.
Yes.
You can't break that. And so given those two things, I would say that's what leads me to, I would have supported the production, theatrical production, Kanata by Lepage. I haven't seen it, and so when I heard it was developing, I didn't know the inside story, but in my mind, I supported it as an intercultural theater artist who's Indigenous as well. And my work comes from Indigenous techniques and methods and worldview. That's the only difference, because I've always wanted our Indigenous beliefs to stand alongside other world theatrical traditions. The methods and techniques must be teachable to everybody. And if I think about it, if I try to make a formula, I would say Indigenous, let's just say Indigenous social world story multiplied by European theatrical process equals theater doubled.
It
So
equals something else.
something else.
Something else, and I think both of these voices should be heard.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna give you an example. I know it seems simple, but you know, I have German friends whose ancestors were Nazis. Well, as documentary filmmakers or as artists, they want to express something out of it. Their ancestors were Nazis. So it's normal that as French colonizer ancestors, we also have a sensitivity about the situation of First Nation. Of course, we're not from First Nation. We're not the one who suffered. We're not the one who were victims of a cultural genocide. But I think we should be allowed, in respect, but we should be allowed to also express our voice in this story. Yes, of course, there's been a lot of white people who did tell the story of Indigenous people, and I agree that now it's time for Indigenous people to tell their own stories. But I think there are very great storytellers, and I think Robert Lepage is one. And I think that what he was proposing with the Théâtre du Soleil, which is a closed theater troupe. It's not a theater troupe that hires new actors for their shows. It's always the same bunch of actors who work, the same noyau.
Do you think
they were allowed to do that.
Yes, Hélène, if I may interrupt, do you think part of the conflict, in this polemic, was a European theatrical system of Minushkin and the Canadian theatrical system of contract actors?
Yeah, of course, there was a misunderstanding on the nature of the Théâtre du Soleil, because one of the not complaint, but one of the problem with the creation was that people thought the fund of the show was from Canadian government, but most of the show was coming from the Théâtre du Soleil and from New York company of theater company in New York. There was some money of Conseil Canadien des Arts that is given to Ex Machina, the troupe of Robert Lepage, that comes yearly, that was used for the production, but it was not, Ex Machina asked for a specific grant to do this show. It was very early stage of the show, and there were no Indigenous people involved yet because they didn't know what would be the show, and they were not given the grant. But the Robert Lepage didn't say, okay, I'm gonna re-ask again for this. He didn't complain. He understood that he could not get this money, and he moved on doing the production with the Théâtre du Soleil and the theater in New York. So this show was not stealing money from other theater Canadian troupe. It was financed differently in a very specific kind of theater troupe in Paris. And one thing I found very difficult too is that Ariane Mouchkine was told to care about minorities, and when you know what she's done in the last 50 years in her theater, she did shows on the immigrants, on war, on always talking about minorities being played by actors from different nationality, countries that had nothing to do with the character they were playing. I think there would have been a better knowledge of what was going on in this creation.
Yes, in this country of Canada, the actors of Minushkin would have a hard time to find employment within the Canadian theatre system as well. Because
they are minorities themselves.
They are minorities. They would probably not, very rarely get a job.
I'm going to tell you something.
That exists, yes, go ahead.
Something very interesting that you can see in the film, but if the show would have been done, you would have realized, is that Robert Lepage gave some of the roles were given to actors who barely speak good French or good English, because the show was supposed to be French English and some native language. It was very hard because there was some people involved in the translation, but it changed over time. So I don't know which language it would have been exactly, but so the Chinese actress, at first she had a very she had a very long text, but she's Chinese, she speaks French, but it's difficult to so he was not. And also the Afghani, it was the first time they would have part talking in a piece of theater. They were not just bodies, because Ariane Mouchkine used a lot of the language bodies of the actors in her shows, but Robert was using them even if they had accent. He was really using them with their specificity. And this for me was really interesting. And this is one of the part I wanted to, on the language, I would have liked to put the emphasis on this if I could have done the film I was thinking I was doing.
Yes, because in the Canadian radio or television or theater, there exists too, you must speak like a standard Canadianized English without the accent. So it's hard for people, even like myself with my Cree accent, it's hard for me to be acceptable on a stage with an accent. And it's hard for some of my people who still speak with accent to have employment in these industries. And I imagine it's the same with people who don't speak maybe a proper French within Quebec theater, or else maybe in France. So that's what struck me, what I thought, is to see my colleagues, my international colleagues from Minushkin's company, because when I studied with Grotowski in Europe, a lot of actors from Minushkin sometimes pass through our theater, audition, or to workshop, things like that. And so when I seen these actors, I was very much touched by these international actors having the opportunity. And also, and knowing within the context we now live in, decades later, me in Canada, them coming here to Canada, we live very much in a world that is destroying art and projects by colonial laws of identity and so forth. So I was, that's one of the moving things about your film is to show, I guess, to show the struggle of our Indigenous people in this country, but also these international actors, to see them working on this project and to see CJ thanking them and to tell our story to the world. That's what grabbed me for this film, and that's what led me to program this film for our festival. And I hope a lot of my people see this film.
Thank you.
Yes.
I hope so. I hope some people could watch without prejudice, because this is the difficulty with this film, of course, because when we know what happened, it's not easy to watch without having our own opinion before.
Yes, yes, of course. Well, Hélène, I want to thank you for taking the time to be a part of our festival. And I think at this time, there is maybe some of the participants wanted to send in a question by message or maybe be online.
Alex gonna help you with this, I think.
Yes, I'm not the best. Yes.
Well, yeah, if people want to ask questions, just go ahead.
Okay. If anybody wants to ask a question.
Or you can write in the chat if you try,
Or if not, just watch our film later.
Ula has a question.
Yes, Ula has a question.
I think you have to, I'll unmute you. Okay, there.
Hi. I just want to say thank you both for the conversation. Do you hear me, Dad?
No,
Yeah.
I was wondering what is happening now, Hélène, to the performance? Is it just archived? Is it never going to be pulled out again? Is the Théâtre du Soleil moving on to a new project?
Yes, Théâtre du Soleil, they are moving on a new project, and the same for Ex Machina, Robert Lepage company. And I really doubt that it would ever come back again. It's too hurtful. Too much things have happened around it.
It's a shame, because I think curiosity is there. I think people would see it, and I know myself what a very, very tricky path it is.
You know, there was, as I said earlier, there was a 1.5-hour version that was showed for a few months in Paris. And it was reworked for French audience, because we knew at that time that it would never be shown in Canada. And what I can tell you is that some of my French friends have been going 3 times to see the show, because they never heard about the missing and Indigenous woman before. And after watching the show, they were asking me for books to read, for Indigenous stuff to watch. They were really curious to know more about Indigenous culture. So this is why sometimes I really truly think that if this show would have happened, it would just have raised more interest into the Indigenous culture. And because it's Théâtre du Soleil and Ex Machina, this would have bring a lot of people that normally are not curious about it to discover it.
I agree. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is there anyone else?
Yeah, hi, I'll ask a question.
Yes.
Hi, folks. This is Curtis Peditus. I'm from Treaty 6. I'm currently Zooming from Saskatoon. And pardon my picture, it's a coffee morning for me in this picture. But I don't necessarily have a question, but more of a comment and possibly a short story. One of the things I'm interested in is what actress Zoe Saldana recently tweeted, that she was very much, I don't know, ashamed, or she felt horrible, even though she is a Black woman, for playing Nina Simone, because to play Nina Simone, what she had done and confessed to was blackfacing herself, was making her skin darker in order to play Nina Simone. So what that brings to me is the idea of intercultural appropriation. I know many times I have played a different Indigenous person, and I've not been totally comfortable with that. So in a couple of instances, it has been detrimental to my own artistic process as a Cree Indigenous man. So I'm hoping that one day we can have conversations about intercultural appropriation and possibly what those potential issues, those stories, and those perspectives might be. So that could be for another time, but I'm very much interested in those conversations. Thank you.
Sorry, Curtis, I have a question for you. I won't say your last name because to Petitus. Would you like to play a white person, a white French Canadian person in a piece of theater?
I don't think so. What I'd be more interested in is an Indigenous expression of a very popular or settler or white character, such as Scrooge or Hook. I think that with my own foundation of culture, language, and history, I can bring more of an Indigenous kind of flavor to these characters as opposed to being or playing a white character. I'm not sure if that makes sense.
It totally makes sense. I'm just, you understand how tricky it is for me as a white woman to say that, but you know, when all this controversy happened, I have a lot of friends who are actors in Quebec, and all my white friends didn't know what to say, because of course we are part of supposedly a majority, but being French in Canada is being a minority. And I cannot forget that in the 60s and in the 70s, French Quebecers were still fighting to find a way to be recognized as French culture, different from the rest of Canada, as well as Indigenous nations try to want to be there by their own, and it's normal. So I just think that in theater we can express ourselves, and we should be able to express ourselves through characters that are not from our origins. And I do think it's really important that Native people or people of color that don't have enough place on the stage, and I do understand that, have more place, but I don't think they should only play Black people or Indigenous people. It's really important that they can incarnate something else, whatever they want, because this is what is theater about.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Interesting. Thank you.
Yes, I just wanted to quickly say, so as a theater student, one of my main important plays in my life was Jean Genet's play, The Blacks. This is where he had actors, the Black actors playing the white role, and then the Black people playing Black people. So, but it was written by a white Frenchman. And then plus he was many other things, he said. He was a criminal, he said. He was, et cetera, et cetera. And so I remember reading that as a young person and thinking at these playing of roles. And so I always thought that was one of my inspirations. And the other plays that I read as a student was Athol Fugard, the South African play like Master Harold and the Boys. He had Black characters in his plays, and these are great plays. And I don't know if these plays will ever be done again because of the cultural climate that has entered this country. And then the other thing is, for example, the Indigenous people. There is a broad range of Indigenous identity, but it's the people who speak their language, who have accents, who are visibly brown or visibly Indigenous or visibly Inuit. They are not the ones you see on the stages. They are not the ones getting the roles. They're not the ones working in universities or teaching drama or anything like that. So there is, within that too, there is a colonialism at work on who we say is Indigenous, even amongst our own selves. I don't know if anybody wants to respond to that, but I just wanted to throw that out there. And one of the things about, I would say about Kanata, the production and the film, was I thought there was it seemed to me the dialogue, the disagreement was between educated Indigenous people who knew the discourse and non-supposedly educated Indigenous people, but who were more visibly Indigenous with their accents and their appearance. It seemed to me, because I'm sensitive to that, because I grew up with that discourse all of my life. I seen this discourse at work in that film, Hélène. I don't know if I'm right in my perception.
Well,
completely off the mark.
In the 35 people who signed the letter against Kanata, half of them, I would say, were from theater or art. They were Indigenous people from art sectors. But half of them were also representative of organism who works to help Indigenous people, like homeless women in Montreal, Indigenous women in Montreal, or shelter for Indigenous women in Montreal. Of course, they were against the fact that actors would talk in the name of Indigenous women, but they didn't know about the essence of theater neither. So it was really difficult to make all of this group very different, with different views on the project, because the Indigenous actors, some of them, they just wanted to be part of the show. They wanted to integrate the troupe and be part of Kanata. But half of the people against the show were just against the simple facts of an actor that is not Indigenous and a French Quebecer theater director that would talk in the name of Indigenous women. So there was no way to get out of it. It was a trap.
Yes, it's a complex question. Like, even I must watch my words, because I know I would offend many people, my own Indigenous colleagues. So I must watch my words as well. And but all I can say is I always advocate for Indigenous people who have visible obstacles through speech, color, economic background, and I don't feel they themselves get the opportunities that supposedly for Indigenous people.
We totally agree on this.
Okay, okay, so.
And I do work in that sense when I do documentaries.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, when I start to do this film with Robert Lepage, in my career, for the first time, I had the impression I was about to do a film on people who are not voiceless, because they have the stage, they're the most famous of the theater. But when the polemic rise, I realized that I would be again the voice of people who didn't get, in my sense, enough place to express their real intention, that were judged on something that no one had seen.
Yes, it's a complex dialogue, and but I want to, before we turn off the camera, is our viewpoint here is Indigenous performance as an intercultural. It has an intercultural face. Indigenous theater as a discipline with its own methods and principles and body of knowledge rooted in the methods of Turtle Island, and is open to the world and welcomes the world. And I hope sometime that this vision, our idea, this intercultural world that I had grown up in Europe, in the theater, that I witnessed amongst my own people, I hope one day that it can take place. And I hope we can keep up a dialogue of theater, even if we disagree. We don't have to write letters towards each other. We don't have to block each other's funding. We don't have to try to destroy each other. And if we have a disagreement on an artistic project, we don't have to call each other racist. Nothing
well,
like.
if we don't fight, maybe we can better work together after.
Find a way, yes. Find different ways to dialogue, and that's one of the main things about our festival. And with that, I'd want to take the participants' time. They're politely still hanging in there, and I thank their participation. And this is recorded, and we will have it online. So I want to thank everybody. If you have any more questions, you can just email us directly. And but thank you once again, everybody, and nice to see some of the people I know, Curtis, and I've seen Alex Rogalski's name there, Ula, my old colleague, Ula, and so on. So thank you, Helen.
Thank you for having me, and good luck for the rest of the festival.
Yes, best wishes in your artistic career and life.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
See you sometimes in Montreal.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye.